Love a good live stream, don't you? Alright, I think it's time now. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for coming to our June content lab. I really appreciate it. Obviously joined tonight with Sam Lloyd from the Human Ordinary podcast. So the way it's going to run is that I am going to play a couple of clips of Sam's from the podcast and ask some questions, but please feel free to jump in at any time with any questions of your own. I want it to be as casual and kind of as collaborative as possible, so yeah, don't be shy. So to start off with, I'm just going to play a clip from Human Ordinary from episode 14, which I think was just the first episode of the later season that you just started.
Yes, yep.
Cool. It's not super loud, but hopefully it's loud enough.
Nearly 3 years ago, when my daughter was born, I had a bit of a realisation about my life. People smarter than me might refer to it as an existential crisis. It involved the fact that at 35 years of age, I hadn't really produced anything creatively. I'd always wanted to be a writer, but never had the work ethic to really make a go of it. So the thought that my kid would grow up with a dissatisfied and resentful dad played on my mind. I wanted her to learn that she should always do whatever made her happy, even if it was just in the hours between her paid work, even if it was just some little project she put together in her room. And so I started this podcast. I was interested in telling the stories of normal, everyday people doing normal, everyday things. I thought there was something special and extraordinary in the ordinary, and I wanted to try and show how these things connect us all and make us human. And so it's with all of that in mind that I introduce you to season 3 of the show. Each story this year is an attempt for me to explore the connection I have with others. I'll be talking with some left-wing protesters, an archaeologist, a bunch of dickheads, my neighbours, my political opponents, and some professional wrestlers. But today, in a special pre-season episode, you're just going to hear from me. And like many good things, this story starts with a beer.
Important to point out that SYN does not promote drugs, alcohol, or ticket prices on SYN. But I really like that clip because I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of what the podcast is. So I guess just before we kind of get too deep into that, I kind of wanted to take a step back a bit and talk about how you got into podcasts.
Yeah, right. That kind of explains it a little bit. It was sort of, it was becoming a dad and then sort of going, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? I've done nothing with my life. And I had wanted to be a writer, and I did study writing, and I worked a little bit in writing, but not much more than sort of pursue writing craft. I spent my 20s, working in bars and frequenting bars, and that was pretty much it. So, yeah, I had a good time. My 20s were fun and all that, but I didn't do much work. So, yeah, come 35, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And I know podcasting sort of appeared to be an accessible medium, I think. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to tell non-fiction stories. In my late 20s, I went back to uni to do a youth work degree, and also did social science as well, and so I got my honours in sociology. So I was really interested in sort of like people and why they do the things they do, and culture and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and podcasting sort of appeared as an accessible way, I think, just to get my stories out there, really, and to get this interest out there. And I had experience in film as well, but I don't know, it seemed like it was this nice little middle ground between just writing like a blog and trying to bust a hump to do like a film. It was sort of like this was in the middle. So yeah, it was kind of that. So I just kind of just said stuff it one day, and I just started. I started with my phone. Like I bought like a $7 app on my phone, and I was like going around recording things and talking to people. That was pretty much it.
Yeah. Were you listening to a lot of podcasts before you started making them?
I was. I certainly listen to a lot more now. Probably like Mystery Show. Do you guys know that show? That was the one that finally sort of gave me a bit of a kick. I was sort of, I don't know what it was about it either. I think it was, it wasn't, the podcast, I know one question that you're going to ask is like, what did it for me? But so I don't want to jump the gun there. But like, Radiolab was the first podcast that I was really like, wow, this stuff is awesome. But Radiolab also is technically brilliant. It's like the editing in that and the sound design, and I mean there's a lot that goes into that. And then I think when I was listening to Mystery Show, I said, oh wow, it's really pared back, and it's just all about real. It was the writing. The writing really sort of popped, and just with sort of her voice and interesting things, and it was cute and it was interesting, and so I think it was like that one. It really just gave me that last little push that I needed, and I was like, yeah, I can make a shot of this. You know, I'll give it a go at least. Yeah. So, and Strangers and Home of the Brave, they're the three. Those ones all taken together. They're sort of they were my main inspirations. I guess. Yeah.
And now you're part of the Planet Broadcasting Network.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with those guys?
By sheer luck, and it's who you know, not what you know or what you can do. Yeah, it was. I mean, the boring story is that I got a mate, and my mate is he's part of this improvised troupe called Impro Tunes. So they're always at Fringe and Comedy Festival and all that. Anyway, they were hired by another group, and in this group was this woman called Claire Tonti. And Claire mentioned to my mate that she's starting up a podcast network, and he said, oh, my mate's got a podcast. And that was pretty much it. And then she listened to the podcast, and then she gave me a call, and we started talking, and that's sort of how that came about, really. Yeah. That was like early on. That was like at the end of the first season. And, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the long and the short of that, I think.
Yeah, and how have things changed since you've joined the network? How have things changed in terms of like your production?
I think it's become a lot more serious. Like in the beginning, I put my podcast and I hosted it with Squarespace, which is just a web, easy sort of website developer, whatever you call it. And I did that. That was a real specific choice because Squarespace doesn't offer analytics. It doesn't tell you how many people have listened to your podcast, and that was really important for me.
To know that how many people were listening or weren't listening.
Weren't. It was about the weren't. Because I knew myself. The original name of my podcast, when I first conceived the idea of I'm going to do a podcast, I was going to call it My New 2-Month Project, and it was going to be as much about the stories as it was about me doing the podcast and me battling sort of my own, I guess, self-esteem issues and creative demons and all that kind of stuff. Because I have a tendency to start doing something and then after 2 months completely just giving it away. So there's been all these little creative endeavours that I've had over the years, and in film scripts and books and whatever it might be. Magic. I was going to be a magician at one stage, so I was learning. I was getting really good at it and all that, all the card tricks and sleight of hand. And then 2 months later, I'm like, oh, this sucks. So it was important for me that I didn't know who was listening or who wasn't listening. So I hosted with Squarespace, and then so at the end, and then coming on with Planet Broadcasting, all that had to change. I had to have an idea about my audience. So that kind of changed things a little bit. The whole thing sort of got a little bit more professionalised as well. Like at the start, I would release an episode whenever I could, and some were delayed and some weren't. Now I've kind of got a schedule, and now I've got sponsors as well. And the whole season this year has been, all the dates of the releases to coincide with sponsor campaign periods. So it's really been dictated by them as well. So it's Is it saying a double-edged sword? Is that right? Yeah, because it cuts that way and cuts you. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword because it's great to have sponsors. It's fantastic. I'm earning a little bit of money from podcasting, which is amazing. I never thought I would. But I am essentially being paid to do an ad read. I'm not being paid to produce a podcast story. I'm being produced to sell a product, which it kind of does leave a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, especially when you don't have a relationship with the product. You may not have, but still you got to read and you got to like sell it to your listeners, and you kind of got to lie to your listeners, which I don't really like. So that nothing much about the production of the show. I made an important point with them when we were signing contracts. This is Planet Broadcasting, the network, that they would have no editorial sort of say or control over my stories, and so wouldn't advertisers. That if they didn't like what I was producing, then they didn't have to advertise with me or anything like that. So, and that hasn't happened. There's been no oversight at all with anything. But yeah, other than that, nothing much has really changed. I guess I get more listeners as well, just through being with a network. You can kind of share an audience and help each other grow, which works a lot better in theory than it does in practice. Yeah, I mean, some networks like Gimlet, I mean, that's what they do. But Gimlet's like a production house as well, whereas what I'm with like we all produce our shows independently, and then we're just kind of like on this network, this loose sort of network of shows. And do you guys know? Have you seen Planet Broadcasting, other shows that are on it at all? Yeah. So you know that my show is a bit of a dark horse on it, or black sheep. That's black sheep. There's shows about comic books and comic book movies and all comedy podcasts, and then there's me. Although they did have Fallon for a while, which is true crime, and there's another one called Just Make the Thing, which is sort of about sort of that creative empowerment kind of stuff as well. But yeah, so it's difficult. It's difficult because I'm trying to pitch sort of my show to people, to the audience who just want to hear about the latest Marvel movie. So yeah,
Victor, podcast manager, who kind of put this whole thing together, but unfortunately he was not able to make it because he's graduating tonight. So congratulations to him. He wanted to ask a question about kind of developing your listenership. How have you kind of gone about attracting new listeners? Have you done much of that yourself, like organically, or has a lot of that come from Planet Broadcasting?
A little bit of it came from Planet Broadcasting, and appearing on like one of their shows, like their big sort of their flagship show is the Weekly Planet, and that sort of Planet Broadcasting is based kind of around the Weekly Planet basically, and so I appeared on their show in like May last year. That helped, big boost in listenership, big sort of boost in online engagement as well. So there's that, kind of grows that way. I used to do this thing which I was then told I shouldn't do, so I stopped doing it. When I had a new podcast release, I would tweet it and tag all of these people into it. So I'd like do like 20 to 30 sort of like different tweets, all with these like different people sort of tagged in it, and so I tried to do it that way. I was told that I shouldn't do that. That's just annoying people. So I did stop that. Look, the long and the short of it is I didn't do much in the early days. I didn't do much to try and grow my listenership because essentially I didn't know kind of what to do. I'm not very savvy with social media, so I tried my best. I paid for a lot of Facebook like advertising, like boosting posts and all that, which I don't think works. That's my personal experience of it. I think save your money. So I stopped doing that. And I don't have much of a Facebook engagement anyway. So, but the biggest thing that happened was I did a story, and then I sent it off to Leah Tao, who does a podcast called Strangers in the States. And Strangers is a massive influence on my podcast as well. So it's very similar. They're just kind of stories of people and their experiences, and so it's a very sort of similar vibe. And Leah's a very, very good storyteller. So she also, a little bit of trivia, she's one of the people that started the Moth Story Slams, Leah. So I sent off this piece to her, and I just said, Leah, I feel like all of my stuff's influenced by you, but this one especially is influenced by you, because I was even like listening to old stories of hers as I was like editing and trying to get sort of the feel. And I just said, I would love your feedback. And she wrote back and she says, I love it and we want to play it on their show. So that's what they did. And downloads just went ballistic after that. It was really quite crazy. And you get like phone calls from like, not phone calls, no, people email these days. But emails from,
Sorry, I'll just
headphone companies in Sweden and saying I want
noticed
to
in media
sponsor
this is
me
Lindsay.
and all this kind of stuff. It was a bit mad. And that's been the biggest thing that's
Oh,
happened.
okay. Are you at the front door or the back door?
To sort of boost
Okay,
my
I'll just be a
listenership.
second.
This year I took a massive break between seasons. Had another baby, and then we had to wait for all these sponsors, like campaign periods, as I said before, and all this nonsense. So I took a big break, and I've noticed now that I've started releasing episodes again that I've lost a lot of the listeners that were around last year. Probably dropped by about 30%, I would say, and that sucks. So I've got to try and like get them back. So just recently, I have been I've just been like sending out a whole lot of emails, and I did up a press release, and I'm going to do up a press kit as well, and just sending it to a whole bunch of different podcast newsletters and podcast websites and all places that promote podcasts, and also Claire at Planet Broadcasting on my behalf sent off applications and requests to iTunes to be featured, and it actually worked today. I'm now on the top on iTunes. Yeah, just got there today, so that's pretty cool. We'll see what that does to the downloads as well. So it's about that stuff as well. I think I think the best podcast promotion that you could possibly do is to be on other podcasts, and whether or not that's just to do a 30-second promo of your show and then to ask someone to run it. Do it like they did like promo swaps a lot in podcasts, or you might have to pay, or you might get a guest on the show depending on what the nature of your show is. That's the best way, because then you get into the ears of listeners, and it's certainly what I've found.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a long answer.
No, I think it's really useful. So the clip that we played at the start goes on to tell the story of Sam's second baby being born. So I wanted to talk about, you do have kids, you have a job.
Sure do, yeah.
When do you make your podcast? And how do you make the time?
It's really hard at the moment. I used to when it was just our daughter, my partner who's super supportive. That's probably the first thing if you do have dependents. Make sure that they're really supportive of you, which my partner is, which is amazing. I couldn't do it without her. Let me just say that. She used to give me Sundays. I get every Sunday to work on the show. That can't happen now. 2 kids, it's too hard. So the podcast gets done usually in the hours between 9 p.m. and midnight on most nights. I freelance in podcast land as well, so I devote all Mondays to that. So if I can bust a hump and get all my work done on the Mondays, then I got that spare time to work on that. I do it on the train on the way to work. I live in Reservoir. I work in Elsternwick, so I've got quite a long commute. So I do it on the train. Any moment that I get, I do it. I have a job where I work a lot of overtime. So rather than get paid for that overtime, I take time off in lieu, and then that I use to do the podcast as well. So yeah, so it's hard. And I'm sort of, I don't know, if you could put your life on hold, the best thing honestly would be that I wasn't doing the podcast this year, because it's going to be really, really hard. But I made myself a promise that I would do this for 10 years to see what happens, to try to have a career change, to try to make something of it. So that meant doing it every year. So I've got to stick with it. Yeah. But it's tough.
Yeah. Where do you edit? Where do you record, and what do you use to edit?
So I do everything at home.
It sounds really good for, the quality is really good.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think we've got...
I know.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I'm shocked as well, because a lot of people do talk about the bad quality that they get. I think the room that I do it in, my study, was quite small, and it's just full of stuff. So I guess it's not a cavernous room. And yeah, so I do all the recording there, or interviews I do usually at people's houses. I go over there and record there, make them feel comfortable. And then I use Hindenburg to edit with. I don't know, do you know Hindenburg? No? What do you guys edit with?
Adobe Audition.
Oh, wow. All right, yeah. So I have no idea about that stuff. Hindenburg works for me because, as I said before, I'm technically not very proficient at all. Hindenburg's really quite easy. There's a simple way of putting it. There's not much to do with it. It's just sort of, cut up here and splice there and all that kind of stuff. But it works for me because, I'm very focused on story rather than sort of sound design and all that. I'm in awe of people like Joel Werner. Remember when he did that thing at the conference? Yeah, it's probably, Sum of All Parts, that podcast on ABC.
Oh, I'll post a link later. It's
very good. Anyway, Joel is he's a sound design madman. He's really, really fantastic, and I'm just in awe of it. But I don't think my brain works that way. I couldn't even really explain to you what EQ is, and if I can't do that, then whatever. So Hindenburg works for me. It's perfect.
So I'm going to play another clip now. I've kind of broken this loosely up into first we're going to talk about the process, next about stories, and at the end advice. So the next clip I'm going to play comes from an episode that Sam did. It was a series all about headstones, and this particular episode is about the Elvis headstone at the Melbourne Cemetery, which is a lot of fun. The story's a lot of fun, not death. Again, it's not super loud, but loud enough.
If you take a walk through the Melbourne General Cemetery, try to head into the centre where the mausoleum is. Somewhere around there, where paths converge, and at the entrance to a small stone grotto, you'll find a memorial that at any given moment will be surrounded by fresh flowers, colourful toys, and pictures. It is a much loved and cared for headstone. But the person for whom this is built is not even buried here. He's actually buried at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a memorial to the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley.
And then later in that episode, Sam goes on to interview all these different people who have a connection to Elvis. In particular, this bloke who lives in Geelong, who is, I think he said, the biggest fan of anything that you've ever met. He has a shrine in his house dedicated to Elvis, and I think there was one point where you're in his bedroom and he's got 3 different Elvis belts that he just never wears, they're just for show. Which is a really great story, and I think kind of is a reflection of the great talent and stories that you have on the podcast. How do you find stories, and how do you find people to talk to? Maybe we could use that one as an example rather than talking about every single episode.
So, and it is a good example because it's something that I think a lot of my stories sort of start with my own interest in something, and maybe like a question about, you know, what's up with that kind of thing. So I do. I start with that interest, and if like so. Last year, all of the stories. It was called the Headstone series, and what I wanted it to be. It didn't completely turn out this way, but what I wanted it to be is that every story would start with a headstone, and then the story would be told about. You know, it was like sort of the story behind the headstone, whether or not it was about the person who was buried there, or about the people they left behind, or whoever it might have been. And that came about because, rather morbidly, but I'll defend this to my dying breath, I am fascinated by cemeteries, and I think they're amazing places. And on days off, I will actually sometimes go to a cemetery just to walk around. I find they're often the most, especially Melbourne cemetery, like you're in, you know, you've got the uni there, and you've got sort of Lygon Street and all of that, and it's just still. It's still and peaceful, and it's lovely to be in there. But also, I walk around and I look at headstones, and they've all got stories in them, like on them. You know, you got like, you know, tragic stories where you sort of see headstones, and it's like family, and all of these young children have like died like years and years before the parents, and you just. The things that I would think about and I would imagine, I always found it really powerful. Anyway, and so there's this Elvis headstone there, and it's in like the prime spot. You could not get a better spot for a headstone in Melbourne. It's like, it's like there's this grotto, and it's just amazing. And so the obvious question was, oh my God, like how did that happen? Like who put it there, and why? But also the other thing that struck me, that I was most interested in, I think, was the fact that any time that I saw it, it was covered in flowers and toys and always different stuff. The stuff has never gone to waste. Like it wasn't like rotting flowers that had been there for years or anything. It was fresh. All this stuff was always fresh, and I always asked myself, who is coming here? Who loves Elvis that much that they're coming to this place? Like, you know, he died in 72, was it? Yeah, 72. He died in 1972. So who is doing this? So it started with that question. And then from there, I just started to explore it. Luckily for me, actually, on that headstone has a little plaque which says who put it there. So my first question was answered. So this guy called Wayne Hawthorne, and it even had a PO box. So that was lucky. I was very, very lucky. Wrote to Wayne. I eventually found a Facebook group for the fan club. Wrote to him, started chatting with him, and then he helped me out, referring me to other people that would be good to talk with. I guess that's how that story got found in the people. Yeah.
Do most other stories come through your own curiosity and stuff that you notice? Yeah, like that, or a bit more vague, like the last story from last year. I was really, really keen to do a story on someone who thought they were going to die, and then obviously didn't. But so I was really interested to tell the story of like what you think about, like how it changes your outlook and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of went searching for that specific person, and that was just like posts on Facebook and just like asking friends and all that kind of stuff. It's curiosity. It's sort of like the best thing about podcasting is I've been able to like already, and I know this year it's going to continue, is I get to experience and like go behind sort of the curtain on like things that kind of excite me. Like I did a story on the Essendon football cheer squad, and so I'm an Essendon supporter. And so, you know, I got to go to when they made the banners on a couple of different nights. I got to go out in the ground with them while they raised the banner. I got to go in sort of all the, the alleys and the whatever beneath the MCG,
and sit with them while, as they played the game and all that, and meet some of the players. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have an excuse of doing a story. So it's kind of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
Like I go, what would I like to do a story on? And this year I'm going to do a story on professional wrestlers in Melbourne. So I get to, they've already given me authorization to sort of talk about the choreography and the scripting of it as well. So I wouldn't be able to experience that stuff any other way. So I have an interest, I have a question, and it all stems from that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And This American Life have a reputation of collecting heaps and heaps and heaps of tape and then getting rid of most of it. Do you spend much time collecting stories and doing interviews that never go anywhere?
Look, honestly, I wish, because it would mean that I would have a lot of time.
Yeah.
But no, I think This American Life, they have the resources to be able to do that. I think there's only been... look, having said that, I've done 15... Well, one was a bit of a trailer. So I've done 14 stories, and I've probably got 4. Actually, no, that's not... Yeah, that's kind of a lot, actually, now that I think about it. I got 4 stories that I would have done a bit of work on, a bit of research, that have been abandoned for different reasons, and a heap of ideas that you put the feelers out there to know that I guess that there could be a story there, and then you just put it on the back burner for another time. Yes.
Have you ever come across a story where you've had to discard it because of sensitivity issues or something that you find something out that someone doesn't feel comfortable you broadcasting, I guess? No, I haven't. Although a lot of the time, I often say, rightly or wrongly, and I've got no journalistic training or anything, so I don't know if this is the right way to go about things. But when I approach someone about a story, I tell them, and I mean it, that it's our story. We're working on this together, so that they have as much input over what goes in as I do. So often when I'm working with them, they'll sort of say, I don't want this to be in the story, even if that is a massive part of the story, like the one that I'm working on now. It's all of this stuff which is really rich, very dramatic stuff that, because of the family, I can't talk about it. So the story has to become something different, but I have never discarded something because of that. I've never sort of abandoned it. Do you tell everybody who you interview at the beginning of your first season, you did the protests, and you interviewed a lot of different voices. Did you tell them, did you just have a chat to them and record it, or do you let them know that you're doing that, or do you tell them where it's going to go?
Yeah, I was up front with all that stuff. Yeah, I got a podcast. It was interesting doing that because that was the first thing I did.
Yeah.
So I was sort of like, I've got a podcast which hasn't got any, episodes yet. Will you talk to me for it? So hats off to them for having the courage to do that, because, I could have been anyone. And, but it's got a podcast, Human Ordinary. I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in why you're here, and would you like to talk to me, and that kind of stuff. And then I try, because I've done 2 other protests as well, because all that political fighting really intrigues me. So I'll always get email addresses, and I'll keep in touch with them, and I'll say, it's coming out now.
Yeah.
And I also say to them, I am happy for them to hear it beforehand. I'm confident in that, because I'm not about to edit things in certain ways to make people sound like idiots, and I don't even think I put a heck of a lot of commentary in those political stories, so that I just let their voices tell their views, kind of thing.
Yeah,
without too much editorialising. So I'm confident if they wanted to listen to it, that they're not going to veto it, because they said it. Kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool, thank you.
yeah, there's that. I did have a guy. So, that's a long story. How long have we got?
I think it's maybe 6:40.
I went to New York. I was actually in New York a month after the September 11 attacks, because we had a family holiday planned, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm in New York and I meet this really interesting guy from Philadelphia in the youth hostel where I'm staying. And we didn't really keep in touch, but he gave me this book. He gave me this Jack Kerouac book. And he wrote this inscription in it and left his email address. And then I'm cleaning out stuff like a couple of years ago, and I find this book, and I'm like, oh man. And I became interested in like the passage of time. It's sort of like when I met him, you know, I was 21 and had all these ideas about what I was going to do and what I was going to be, and you know, all of this stuff, and achieved none of it. And then I'm thinking about this guy Frankie, and he wanted to be an artist, and he took me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he was telling me about all this like, amazing artwork, and that was his thing. And I sort of wonder what he's doing. And so I tracked him down. The email didn't work anymore, but I managed to track him down, and we started talking. I said, I want to do a story on this. I want to do a story on how, you know, how we sort of are not in the places where we've ended up and what's happened in the interim. And he was really keen and he was eager, and we chatted for a while and doing these pre-interviews, and turns out in the preceding years he was a drug dealer, and he was like the boss of like his own little crew, and it was just weed, just so that we've got that settled. Not just weed, but whatever, it was weed. It wasn't anything harder. It wasn't things that were killing people. But you know, and he would sort of live in, if you know anything about the geography of America, like Philadelphia is way out in the east, and he would drive sort of to California on the west coast to pick up this like huge shipment and drive it back in vans and all of this stuff. And then, you know, it was dramatic and it was interesting, it was exciting and all that kind of stuff. And I was excited to tell the story. And then he's just gone completely silent. So he's obviously, I'm imagining that he's obviously thinking, wow, I've spoken to this guy, and because we were sort of friends and we knew each other, but I don't know how comfortable I am sort of making this a story. So that's something that had to be abandoned, I guess.
Did he just no longer correspond with
you? Yeah. It's just gone silent. Yeah, and I got really worried. I was sort of like, man, like, you know, kept on sending emails. Are you all right? Like, is that what's going on? Just let me know. And he finally got back to me. He goes, yeah, I'm all right. Stuff's going on. You know, maybe let's talk down the track. And that's been it. I've tried since, but I haven't had anything back from him. So yeah, and he's not on Facebook, which sort of makes it a bit difficult as well. So yeah, so there's that. Those things will happen. Yeah.
When do you start scripting your stories? Like, at what point along the process? Or does that depend on the direction it sort of flows?
Yeah, there's probably a best practice, and there's probably what I do. And they're very different. Yeah. I will start scripting once all of the interviews are done, and I've got all the tape there, and I know what I'm working with. And that's when I start to do a script. I don't think that's a good way to do it, to be perfectly frank with you. I think what would be a lot better is I do start to sort of jot down ideas and sort of have a rough idea in my head of what the story is going to be, but I don't really make it concrete. I don't really put in the structure. So what I am trying to do with this one is I've done about 5 pre-interviews with this woman, you know, been chatting for a while, really, since last September. And so I've got notes on all of that, and what I'm trying to do there is to script based on those notes. So then when we actually get to do the actual interview, I know what I'm going to get. I know what I want. I know what I need, which is going to make that easier. Yeah, so I think that's probably better. That's what I'd like to do. Yeah.
That leads quite well into a question that Victor wanted to ask about interviews. He asked if you prefer to keep them short to make the editing easier, or if you like to do a long interview to make sure that you get all the information that you need.
I would rather keep them short, but I don't. They're long. They are long, which can be tough.
How long?
So...
Sorry.
No, it's a good question. The episode that Lindsay just played the start of about the Elvis Memorial, so that was 3 different people, and that was 2 hours, 3 hours, and 2 hours of that. So
yep.
Yeah, so I've got to cut that down to a half hour. It was hard. It's hard. And so that I don't know if that's ideal, but it comes into the fact that I honestly don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm not afraid to sort of say that, because this is not, I didn't grow up sort of with radio in the back of my head and sort of like doing this stuff from an early age. And I was doing that with writing. That's my thing. I do know how to write. I don't know how to make radio. So this whole process I'm stumbling upon. So for me, it's kind of like, I'll do some pre-interviews, I'll get a sense of the story, and then I'll get in there and start recording, and then we'll just have a chat, and it'll just go like nuts. Like, we'll talk about what we've already spoken about, we'll talk about new stuff, all of that kind of stuff, So it can get mad. And the last story from last year about a guy who was the guy that was about to die. So he's in a car accident in outback Australia, and he's a doctor. So he sort of takes assessment of his injuries, and he's like, okay, I'm going to die. This is it. And I put him through the ringer. I really did. We had heaps of pre-interviews, and then we recorded for 4 hours the story, and then I went and transcribed it and started to cut it up, and I was just not happy with it, like Kubrick or something. And then so I made him do it all again, and we recorded another 3 hours. So I sort of we used that.
How did you change the approach the second time?
I tried to make it less performative for him. So we tried to have more of a chat, like he was telling it to me for the first time, because that was a real danger, and that's something that I've realised, is that he had told me the story already, like a number of times, and I'd ask him, but what about this, but what about that, and then like 2 weeks later I put a microphone in front of him and I'm like, all right, now tell me the story again and make it good, and so if he's like talking to me, I guess there's something in your head which is just like, I've already told this guy this stuff, so details you might miss, and so we just tried to make it a little bit more relaxed, and I've tried to fix that problem with the current story. I haven't spoken to the woman since March, so and we're about ready to record the interview, so hoping that sort of distance is going to make things a little bit more fresh.
Why do you do the pre-interviews then? Why not just record straight off the bat?
Yeah, because I guess if we were to do that, then I'd have like 10 hours of tape. But based on what I have been doing, I may as well have done that, really. So I guess I need to change the way that I do it, so that the pre-interviews do actually matter. They actually mean something. But look, having said that, so a lot of the stories that I do are very personal, from the subject's sort of point of view. I did a story on a woman who lost a baby at birth, and so that kind of thing. And the story that I'm working on at the moment is about a woman and her health problems and how it's sort of connected to death in the family and this kind of stuff. So it's pretty deep and personal stuff. I don't think I'll be able to get the tape that I do if it was our first conversation.
Yeah.
Like it does require a little bit of getting to know you kind of stuff, and so a lot of the pre-interviews are us just having a chin wag, like it's just, and sharing experiences and just talking, and I think my youth work background helps in that. I'm used to sort of talking to people in that, about deep and heavy stuff, and so it does help in that respect.
Yeah, do you record the pre-interviews?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, purely I never use them in the show.
Is that because you don't do you do pre-interviews on the phone? Or?
Yeah, and they're recorded, so I just plug the phone straight into the recorder, and so it doesn't. I prefer to sort of record someone with a mic. Yeah, so it's that. But then also, I guess I've just, because there's stuff that probably is said in pre-interviews which won't be said again, and I say to people, look, I'm recording, but I won't use this, and that might give them a freedom to sort of talk about stuff that they might not want to talk about when they're actually being recorded.
Awesome. It's about, what does that say, 10 to? Cool. So maybe now I've got stacks more questions to ask, but I also wanted to open up to you guys. If anybody has a question, don't all rush. Yes, Mark.
Has anyone or is anyone about to ask like any of your future like plans for any future stories or podcasts or anything like that?
Mm.
What was that? Sorry.
Well, my question is, do you have any plans for any future stories or podcasts? I'm just not sure that's already been asked. So.
No, I don't think it's been asked.
No, it hasn't been asked. I do. Yeah. The problem is they have so many ideas. I'm really next year. I think I'm keen. I'm interested in work and people's relationship with work and what it means for their lives and all this. But at the same time, I'm really fascinated by people who what people do outside of work and their passions outside. So I don't know if it's going to get really monotonous and boring, but I would like to do like a series of stories that are about people who have maybe kind of interesting jobs, you know, or it's semi-interesting, or just, you know, I don't know, like maybe I can make it interesting, but then they've also got something outside of their job, which so it's kind of this idea about how much does work define who we are, as opposed to the thing that we do, the people who we are outside of work. So so stuff like that. So I've got a whole bunch of different ideas about who I would like to interview. Like I'd love to do a story on one of those people, the chuggers, you know, the charity muggers, they call them. You know, the guys on the street, they're like stopping, go, hey, I like your shoes, come over here and give money to Greenpeace. You know, all those people, like I can't stand them. They annoy the heck out of me. But at the same time, I acknowledge that they're people who are doing a job, and so I just find that their experience would be really fascinating, and to know who they are outside.
Backpackers, probably.
Backpackers, yeah, right, yeah. I've always been fascinated with, so someone, I presume, they used to, someone washes the windows on the Rialto Tower. Someone's job to be on that building outside washing the windows. That to me is fascinating. I want to do a story on them, you know. And at the same time, I want to do a story on window washers in general, because I think it'd be an interesting thing to either juxtapose or show the connections between people that wash the windows in the Rialto and people who wash the windows when you stopped at a traffic light and come out for extra change and all that. So they're both essentially doing the same thing. How are they the same? I guess it'd be
I wonder if the person who washes the window at the Rialto like gets staff meals, like in the food court or something.
Yeah, totally. So there's those things. I'm interested in the country as well, like Australia and who we are as like a national sort of, you know, what our national psyche is. So got ideas about travelling around the country doing stories. So there's a lot actually. Probably don't have enough time to do all the stories I want to do. Yeah.
Yep. What like inspired you to like head in a different direction in terms of your career and to start making podcasts?
I think because this is sort of what I always should have been doing, is telling stories. Like this is what really, I mean, we talk about sort of work not defining us. Like youth worker is probably not the best description of me. Like I think this is what I should have been doing. And it was just that, you know, my 20s were just, they're a bit of a blur. And I probably still don't have the best work ethic, and I always never did. So youth work was like a thing that I did because, you know, it was interesting and I could. Yeah, so I think now after doing youth work for a decade, this is sort of about me trying to get back to who I really am, in a way. Yeah. It's a bit deep, isn't it?
How does it contrast to, so it's like your calling.
Yeah, exactly.
It just fits with you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What about, how does it contrast to writing? Like you find this through audio?
Does
the overlap? I would imagine it would.
Totally, absolutely, yeah. I mean, for me, it's a very, very similar process, and you know, if I can be so bold to say it amongst, you know, audio people, like there's an aspect to it that's a little bit easier as well, because you have, if you're able to get good tape, you can make that work for you. And then so the process becomes a little bit different. It's like, I don't know, it's difficult to explain. Like, I've written a lot of features, and I used to write for a street press in Brisbane, and so they used to send me to do, you know, the big features on, you know, this film or whatever. And so there's a similarity in that process. I would interview them, and then I would use their interviews and their quotes and construct it, you know, in a narrative, basically, with my voice there as well. So it's very similar. But here it's sort of like, you know, with audio, I think you're letting the subject speak a lot more. Like, you're letting them, at least that's what I try to do. I'll try and let them tell the story a lot more. So it's kind of just like, I just have to set them up. Just go, oh yeah, this is Lindsay. And then Lindsay takes over telling the story. And then I might fill in a little bit of the gaps. And often me filling in the gaps is only the gaps in her telling of the story where things don't really connect. Like to sort of like add connectors to parts of the story, can make things more condensed. Like, you know, Lindsay might rabbit on about this little aspect of the story for like 2 minutes, and then I'll just write like 2 sentences which summarise that. Yeah. So it's a lot of that stuff, but very, very similar. I love the process. You know, you're going out, you're interviewing people, and you're putting it all together. Yeah.
I can keep on asking questions. A big one that I wanted to touch on, like both professionally and personally, is in relation to staying motivated and getting burnt out. At the end of your first 2 seasons, have you felt burnt out, and how do you kind of bring yourself back from that?
Yeah. Yes. Is the short answer to that. How do I bring myself back? I did go away at the end of last season. I just went away for a weekend, just by myself, just where I could just watch movies and sit around and drink some beer, and I just didn't have to worry about anything, which was really nice. So you got to be kind to yourself, I guess. At least I do. I got to be kind to myself and allow myself some time to rest and relax and not always be on. But it's difficult because at the moment, so I essentially, like, I work 5 days a week, and then I do this podcast, and then I've also got 2 kids, and you know, I've got a relationship as well, and so there's a lot going on. So I have to just, I don't know.
Does that kind of make you a bit more motivated to do it because you've got such a limited amount of time, you don't really have any time to waste?
Probably does, actually. Yeah, it probably does. Yeah. I haven't thought of it like that, but you're probably right. Yeah. There is that aspect, because, you know, I have a gold medal in procrastination, but which I've probably gotten a lot better with that because if you've only got that 45 minutes on the train, and that's all you get that day, then you're going to really use that time. So yeah, for sure.
Any other questions? I had another one from Victor. He asked about how you tackle writer's or editor's block. If you ever come across that.
I don't know how much I have. Like, maybe editor's block. I don't know. Probably just taking a break from it. Like, is really all that you can do. Like, if it's not coming, then it's not going to come. Like, no matter how much you sort of sit there. So, yeah, probably taking a break, go and do something else. Like, it helps, I guess, if you do have a lot of other things that you can do. So it's like, all right, I'll go do this thing, and you know, go for a walk, you know, without listening to a podcast. Or sometimes I do listen to a podcast. Like, you know, there's some podcasts out there which are just fantastic for the craft of doing a podcast. Like, have you heard of one called How Sound? The best. How Sound is the best. It's so awesome. And there's one even from Melbourne Uni called Masterclass, and that's really good as well. One called the Turnaround, and the Turnaround's interviews with interviewers, and about the craft of interviewing. So they've spoken to like Louis Theroux, Werner Herzog, like Jerry Springer, who Errol Morris, who's a documentarian, and he's mad. In actually a lot of respects, he is to hear him talk, he is actually a bit crazy. Yeah, so I guess maybe that sort of to maybe hear how other people have done it, how just to sort of come at it from a different angle. Yeah.
And mate, yes, Mark.
What about if you have too many ideas and you don't quite know what to do, what to exactly to commit to exactly?
Yeah, that's hard. So, a couple of good pieces of advice that I got about this. The first one is this little saying called "kill your darlings." So, that speaks to this idea that you have to be prepared to bin really good stuff, and you might decide to kill your darlings based on the second piece of advice that I got, which is you need to really look at what pushes the story forward. Like you might have this awesome bit of tape or this awesome thing that you just think is great, or an awesome piece of writing that you've done. But if it doesn't push that story forward, and if it doesn't relate to the purpose and the theme of the story that you're doing, then you've got to get rid of it. And that way you can start to whittle things down. And I've killed a lot of darlings, doing some stories, a lot of stuff that I love, that I absolutely love. Like tape, like what Lindsay was talking about, this guy from Geelong, this Elvis fan. Like I got so much fantastic tape. He's such a character, this guy. He's an amazing character. And I just had to bin a lot of it because a lot of it just didn't, fit with the story. So yeah, most of my stories, like I always try and get my stories half an hour or under. That's the goal. Most of the time at a first edit, they're at least 45 minutes. So there's a lot of stuff there. And then even to get it to 45 minutes, I've had to already bin a lot of good stuff. But then to get rid of like a third of what you thought was like your story can be really tough. And so you've got to be really strict about it. You've got to be really disciplined and just go, what adds to the story? Get rid of everything else. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we've...
I have one more question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So my question's gonna... I don't want to phrase this without being rude.
No, be rude.
I guess because you do have access to a podcast network, why have you chosen not to involve anyone else in the creating of the podcast?
Yeah. There's probably a number of answers to that. The first one that comes to mind is I don't know how to collaborate. I'm not certain on that process. Like I've always done things by myself, so I'm not certain on actually how to do that. The second, I don't know who from the network. Like, there's not another sort of show that's similar that we could easily sort of collaborate. And yeah, like I know one of the questions is like what.
Well, I'm thinking less about collaboration and more more editorial. Like, I want you to listen to this, Lindsay, because we're on the same thing. I just want you to check to see if this makes sense.
Yep.
Is this edit working? Rather than slaving it, because my biggest thing is constantly editing, listening back, going through it, doing it myself.
Yep.
And then kind of intentionally not looking for feedback.
Yep.
When I probably should be.
Sure. Yeah. That's something that I have identified I should change, because to have someone to bounce those ideas off at every stage of the way as well. Like, I've thought of this idea, what do you think of it? And then after pre-interviews, and then after you've done it, and all around, I want to have someone to bounce things off. I do want that. So I've kind of, there's a conference that Lindsay and I were both at the start of the month. So sort of chatting to people, and I approached a couple of people to sort of say, hey, would you do this for me? So I'm going to have that in the future, which is going to be good. It is going to be a thing. I started off doing that. There's this fellow called John Sheeha who works at the Wheeler Centre, and John's fantastic. And so I was sending him my stories and saying, John, tell me what you think. Give it to me. But then I felt like I may have been imposing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start to self-doubt yourself and second-guess yourself and go, I won't ask because they'll feel obligated to be nice. and say yes when really they don't have the time to do this. So then you start sort of thinking in that way, and so then I stopped approaching John for feedback, and but no, it's a good question, and I know that one of the questions is like, what do I wish that I'd been told when I started, and that would be it. That would be the thing, is find somebody who can give you honest feedback on what you're doing, at every stage of the way, I think,
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much, Sam, for coming in.
No worries.
It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. I will stop the Facebook live stream now. How do I? There's finish.